Hello, I'm Chris Ott, and welcome to part 3 of this series on the future of the Baba world. When we say Baba world, we mean the world of people who follow Meher Baba. You could call it a movement, but it's really not a movement. It's just sort of like a gang of people who know each other and follow Meher Baba, called the Baba Lovers. And I'm going to go over, because we're going to be talking about the future and the prospects of the future for the Baba world, we need to just quickly go over the demographics that I described in the previous video. So I'm going to do that with this dry marker board here. So, Meher Baba, the last time he came to America 6 times in his life. He lived from 1894 to 1969. He came 3 times in the 30s and 3 times in the 50s. And the last time he came was 1958, and he stayed at the Meher Center in Myrtle Beach, and people came from all over the world. Even his California followers came, and they, no, not all over the world, they came from all over the United States to see him, probably some from around the world, I don't know. But we know how many followers that he had, Western followers, because they had a guest book, and everybody who followed him came because his health was declining. He was being carried in a litter chair. He couldn't walk anymore. So everybody came to see him for the last time. And that guest book had 225 names. So if we figure there's a contingency, maybe 10% of people couldn't come for various reasons. Let's say there were 250 followers. That would be pretty realistic in 1958. And then when my family heard about it in 1964, it was essentially the same. And this is corroborated, by the way, by Tom Riley, who was actually the man who told us about Meher Baba. And his daughter will corroborate that too. She's about my age. She's still alive. He's passed on. But they'll corroborate that the followers in the 1960s was about 250. Our family would have added, 2 more. My mom and dad. I wouldn't count the children. We were too young to have decided. Now you can count me. But so that would only make us like 252. Okay. But then we moved to the center in 1966. There was nobody at the center. We were all alone. We used to have our lunch at the kitchen because it was empty. The Appleys came. Libby had met Baba, I believe in 58. And anyway, they would come and visit us. So that we, like 2 families, we'd make a lunch. But otherwise it was empty. But in 1967, something happened, and it's in a book called Finding God in North Carolina, where a group of people at the University of Chapel Hill found out about Baba through a series of events, and hippies began to come in the year after we arrived. And so in 1967, and that began to grow, and that became the movement. And that grew through the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s to about 3,000 followers. So about more than 10 times what there had been. But they were all basically of that hippie demographic, the older baby boom. And they were largely from the East Coast or the West Coast. They were from the coasts, and they had come from the drug culture mostly. That's how their story and then it goes. And then because of Meher Baba, they gave up drugs because Baba was adamant that people give up drugs, street drugs and hallucinogenic, mind-altering drugs. And so it grew, and this is about how many there were when I grew up later on the center in my teens and so forth, and when I left in 1980. And I have this number from a woman who's now passed away who worked at the gateway of the Meher Center, and they did created this sort of census from their mailing list. of all the people who had passed through the center over the decades. So she told me that number was pretty accurate. Now, I said that over the years, these people, as I said, were the baby boom, and the baby boom just turned 79 this year, so they'll be turning 80 next year. And a lot of them have passed away. Okay, so we're going to make that number today. They sort of stopped coming in the 80s. 86, I know some people that became Baba followers, but after that, pretty much it just stayed the same. So this will change this number now to what is probably 2,500 left, because people are passing away all the time. And then all of these, 2,500, they are this hippie generation, so they're all over 60. So we'll just go plus 60. Okay, that's their age. Now, normally, demographically, if you had 3,000 people, they got together in the 70s and 80s and they married each other. And they had children and formed families. They should have basically replaced themselves. So we should have about 3,000 young people, young enough to be their kids, so like Gen X. But what we really have is about 250 because of the attrition rate. I mean, much like all churches have attrition rates. It's difficult for a group to keep the next generation interested unless they really work at it, which actually Christian churches do work at that today. But if you don't, they'll just wander off. And so now we have about 250. Now, what's interesting about this is that we're back, when these pass away in the next decade or two, we're back to where we were when I was a kid. About 250 then, and we'll be back to 250. Now of small children, because as most people know, especially the millennials and the Gen Zs, they don't have a lot of kids. And so, did I say Gen Zs? So the Gen Zs are kind of kids, but Gen Y, Gen X. But I have figured in to talk to my friend Ben, who's a father and a Baba follower, Baba lover, you could say. There's about 25 children. Okay. So there's not much future in this, okay? This is kind of not a movement. It's the remnant of a movement that's passing away. And if you look up Meher Baba in Wikipedia, it will talk about his movement in past tense as something that took place in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And it talks about it as something that occurred, like a phenomenon. And that's fairly accurate. Now, that's enough of that. Now I want to talk about where I think things are going, because I'm an optimist. I don't see this as... I want to talk about why I think it's interesting and why I think there will be... Baba's legacy will continue, but it obviously has to continue in a new way, with a new start, and new people on new principles. So that's what I want to talk about next. Now, what I want to talk about is where I think things are headed. First, so we get off the subject of the demographic decline of the Baba world. Let's just go ahead, and I'll just tell you my opinion, is that it will essentially pass away. There will be maybe 250 Baba lovers that survive, that are younger, that are today in their 50s and so, and younger. My daughter is about 30. She follows Baba. She's a Baba lover. So there might be 250, maybe 300 of those. And their children, there'll be fewer, less even, but so there'll be some. We'll see. We don't know yet. I have a grandson that's 4. We don't know how he's going to feel about this legacy he's been born into. But let's now go on. So what do I think will follow this? Okay, if I have to talk about some principles, some things that are going on in the world that many might not know about, because I have to create the setting for what could cause a change in the future, whereby people could become interested in Baba. And then I'm going to say why I think it would be lovely if Baba there was a renewed interest in him, even though that probably sounds very unlikely today because most people have never even heard of Mayor Baba. He's, at least in the United States. So, the world right now is going through a transition from what's called the unipolar world, where America led the world, or the leader of the free world it was called, and the West was led by the United States, and it was sort of like that. All power was sort of in Washington, and there was the head of NATO, and it was the dollar was the reserve currency and so forth, and no one questioned that the world was America-centered, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then some thought that was the end of history, and that we now are living in a world where the world simply followed America's lead, whatever America said. But things have been changing. The world is not, the global south is about 9/10 of the population of the earth, and they are starting to see things differently. There's an organization called BRICS, and there's another called ASEAN, and there's many organizations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, many organizations that are Eastern-centered, and they're called multipolar, where they're not trying to replace America with a new hegemon, meaning world leader, but a cooperative and more democratic structure. More like the United Nations was originally intended to be, but gradually became very Western-centric. So right now, this is political, it's economic, it's in process. A lot of people don't even know about this, but it is the major trend of our time. The movement from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And with this, the world begins to open up to other cultures. And they have a word in BRICS. Rather than talking about just countries, they talk about a civilizational state. And what I mean is that China isn't just a country in out of 198 countries. It's a civilizational state. It's one of the BRICS members, meaning it has its own civilization, its own values, its own philosophy, its own religious ideas, its own politics. And so other states leave it to its own way of doing things because that's their civilization. That's none of our business. We just want to do trade and cooperate, much like in the ancient times of the ancient Silk Road. It wasn't about changing people's politics or using soft power to make other countries like your own. It was just live and let live, and let's do trade and let's get rich, and let's have peace and prosperity. Because the best way to have peace between countries is often for them to trade and have business with one another, because it's in their interest to get along and work things out. This is the future, and I think it's a hopeful vision. There's still time. We have to wait to see if this can really manifest and unfold. But it's looking like it is. And just because a lot of Americans have never even heard about this doesn't mean it's not going on. Because it's, like I said, it's like 9/10 of the world is very aware of this. So now this opens up the prospects for a lot more exchange of ideas, okay? Once the political and economic realities get settled out, and these constant wars that have been the result of the hegemon, the unipolar world, has been the result of it has been continuous warring and warring as it tries to maintain its hegemonic position. But as we transfer into this new world, we can see the possibility for the exchange of ideas in a peaceful way. and not the forcing of ideas on other peoples, but simply the exchange of ideas. I should name some other civilizational states. They're all based on a past time when they had their own empire. And a lot of nations today once were empires or large civilizations. Like today we have Egypt. It's a kind of minor country, but of course at one time it was a great civilization. And the same with Iran was Persia, which was the big challenge of the Greeks and the Romans was the Persian Empire. It was really the competitor, is the greatest of the empires. And there's been many like this. England, it was the British Empire. And so we said, then India, there was an Indian, the Ashoka created an empire in about, I think, 250 BC. So Turkey was once the Ottoman Empire, and before that it was the Constantinian or the Byzantine Empire. So it's been several empires. And before that it was a major hub of the Greek Empire. So these are all carry on their civilizational flavors and their temperaments. And so that has to be taken into account. This is a new world where we're no longer trying to make everybody a carbon copy of the hegemon. Like you make everybody a liberal Democrat. Instead, if you're the Saudi Arabia and the way you do things is you have a king and it's not very democratic and it's this way, then fine, that's between you and your people. That's what those people want, let them have it, it's none of our business. That's the view of this multipolar world. So some people might think that's terrible, that we have to tell everybody what's right, what's wrong. But out of thinking like that, that's how you got crusades. Not just Christian crusades, the Muslims had their crusades too. And lots of people have had their crusades. And the communists and the capitalists had their crusade. So hopefully we're coming to the end of that. And a time of cooperation. Now Meher Baba, this is interesting because Baba talked about a new humanity that would come. And he said that he would, in his lifetime, do things that would bring the various religions of the world, which are very different, together like beads on one string.
I intend to bring together all religions and cults like beads on one string and revitalize them for individual and collective needs.
So it's a famous line by him. No, it's been interpreted different ways. Nobody knows exactly how to interpret that. But he always said that he didn't come to bring about a new religion, that there were enough religions. But he's come to bring them together. Now, anyone who's a historian knows that that's kind of a theme in history. Muhammad tried to do and said that he was doing that with Christianity and Judaism, was bringing them together. There are places in the world where that has been the case, where Muslims and Jews and even Buddhists have gotten along well. Syria was one such place. It's not anymore. And frankly, Russia has multicultural in that way. So it would be wonderful to come together where the religions get along. Now, but Baba implies something more than that. He implies they're going to be beads on a string. So let's talk about what that could mean. I'm going to get to the future of the Baba legacy, but I have to do it this long way, I'm sorry. Maybe in time I'll learn to say it much faster, but it's my first attempt at this, to kind of convey this notion. Now, Baba had his tomb. Baba died in 1969, but he prepared for his death 30 years earlier. In 1938, he had his disciples dig his grave and eventually build a tomb. Well, in 1938, they had them build the tomb over it and put the dome, and it's all there now, and pilgrims go there to pay their respects to Baba. But he actually designed and had that built the way it is. It's there in Meherazad near Ahmednagar. No, it's not Meherazad. It's Meherabad near Ahmednagar, India, in Maharashtra state. You can just look up Meher Baba's tomb and in Google Earth, you'll find it. And anyway, part of the design of that tomb is that it has 4 pillars, 4 corners. It has a dome, but the dome has 4 nubs, you could say, that surround the dome. And each one of those is the symbol of one of the 4 major religions that he identified. So one is a Christian cross, it's on his tomb, over his tomb. And another one is the Zoroastrian flame, that's their symbol. It's a fire in a chalice. And then the symbol of there's not the Muslim symbol. What there is a mosque, kind of a sculpture of a mosque, a Muslim mosque, and then the 4th is a Hindu temple. So you have Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. Now, what about others that you could list on and on and on? Well, there's ways that you could describe others as belonging to one or the other of those 4. Okay, so without going into that, but in the center, of course, is the dome, and then there's a needle in the middle, and that represents Baba's advent. And so it's the bringing together of the religions. So how can you bring them together? Aren't they totally disparate? Don't they argue about everything? Well, yeah, they kind of do, because they have their theologies and they disagree. But it doesn't mean that they have to quarrel, because it's not political. It's just spiritual and religious, and they have their concepts. So how would Baba play into that in any way? Well, now I got to back up a little. I'm going to tell this in kind of a funny way. The idea, Baba was silent. If people know that, if anybody knows, he's the silent master. He was silent for 44 years, and he dropped his form. He died without ever saying a word after he began his. And he would always say that when he broke his silence, there was going to be a big upheaval. He would describe it in various ways, and it was always something big was going to happen. But here, he passed away in 1969 of an undiagnosed disorder or disease. They don't know what he had. So the question comes, well, isn't this like, I once heard, I never read the book. I heard there's a book called When Prophecy Fails, about a cult that had some prophecy and then it never happened. So then what happens after that? So people have wondered that about the Meher Baba movement, but really the biggest Baba movement happened after Baba died. So, like I said, they started coming in 67, and he passed away in January 69, just like a year and a half later. And then they continued to come for a couple of decades, and they've stayed with Baba all these years. They're dying of old age now, but they were very faithful, even in spite of this fact that he didn't speak and nothing happened. But people don't really get interested in Baba because they're waiting for something to happen. He talked like that, but I never even heard of a person who became a Baba lover because of some prophecy. So that's where we are. Baba never did speak. Nothing ever did seem to happen. But one of the things that he would insinuate would happen when he would speak. Now, the speaking could be metaphorical in some other way, right? Like, for instance, when people hear what he had to say, that'll be the moment that he really spoke, because people will hear within what he meant. That's sort of what I think. At least that could be one meaning. There could be more than one meaning. He's a mystic, so he speaks in a mystical way. But one of the things he said would take place is that the world would come to him. The world would recognize that he was the avatar, and the world would become interested. And there's a lot of prophecies like that. And I'm often quoting certain ones. One of them is that in just 14 years from now, he says the philosophers will come and pay homage at his tomb. Well, why are they coming to pay homage at his tomb? They're not going there now. I studied philosophy. None of my professors were interested in what Meher Baba had to say, because he's not a philosopher, he's a master. So this is peculiar, but that's the kind of prophecy, he said. However, I wanted to give an example of how preposterous this probably does seem. I don't deny it. But my mother and my father, they both met Meher Baba, my mother twice and my father once, in the mid-1960s. And when my mother came in and met him, I think it was the first time, he said to her, and he has to speak through an interpreter, he said, "Soon the whole world will come to me." Now that was a very strange thing, because Baba was ill, unknown, basically, in the world, not a big famous figure, but relatively unknown. And no one was there. She was at his compound in Meherazad, and had a little gate. And so she thought in her head, she told me this not long before she passed away. She said when he said that, she thought, "Who are you kidding? That's ridiculous." That's what came to her mind. It was just how lunatic that is. What? The world's going to come to you? However, she did follow him for the rest of her life because of his books, the things he said that resonated for her. She believed he was the avatar. But when he said that, when she first walked in the room, saw the modestness of it all, he said, "Soon the whole world will come to me." So, wow, what does that mean? So, I'm going to speculate on that. And this is already running a little long, but I'll just start. People, Baba's followers, and the world have not, in my opinion, understood Baba's message, his teaching. I think one of the reasons that it's been very blasé about Baba, people are kind of, well, why do the kids wander off? Because it's blasé. Like, who cares? That's another guru. Like, there's lots of gurus. Why are my parents so into this guru? Well, they have a point. Their parents had some reason. They have to ask them. I'm not really part of the group. Do my thing. But I wasn't a hippie. I didn't take drugs. I didn't come in 1967. I'm just something else. I'm not really a member of a cult. But I am a Baba lover. And why I think I'm a Baba lover and why I remain enthusiastic and hopeful that he brought something really important is that I think about 25 years ago, I was able to articulate what he had said that no one had said before about God and soul and man, the purpose of what we're doing here. And it's his major book, as I've said many times, is the theme and purpose of creation. God speaks, the theme and purpose of the creation. And he wrote that in 1955, and it's never been out of print. Get it on Amazon. There are even places you can download it for free as a PDF file. So what I think is that people are going to realize what he said. And it is going to bring the religions together like beads on one string, conceptually. That it's not like they'll become Baba lovers in the way that we were in the day, this first movement, if you want to call it, that came and passed away, but in a new way, where instead, understanding what he brought, they begin to incorporate that into all the religions, to interpret the teachings that they have in terms of this theme. And that theme, literally his book is called The Theme and Purpose of Creation. That theme is best understood by reading my books. I've written 3 books. Those books describe this thing that he brought that's totally a paradigm shift, a radical revision of how we've thought about God and the soul and humanity and our purpose and how we got here. It's instead of, well, I leave it to my books to describe because it's complicated, or I wouldn't have written books. I would just sit here and explain it, which I've tried to do in many videos, but it's it's too large. But I basically, I've tried to articulate that. Just like I've tried to share the privilege that I had of my father, Lynott, a famous artist, and famous Baba lover who met Baba, that I had the privilege of having him as a father and him explain to me as a child Baba's teaching. And I've tried to share that so that others, if they want to, they could use that. You don't even have to, Baba's name doesn't come into the story. You could just have that theme that I've described, the God's awakening theme. And you could teach children, or you could have a book, or you could make a little film or a big film from that. But I also wanted to share, and I feel I have successfully shared, my idea, which is called the EOP, or the evolution of perception, which is straight out of Baba. And this is trying to describe the difference between past theologies that all of the religions have and the new. And I know there's people who think that, oh, well, Buddhism had something else, or Advaita Vedanta had something. No, they don't. They don't have any process. There's no explanation of how the universe came about in them, or the theme and purpose of creation. They have it's doctrinal. They have ideology, and you learn the things that are from their scriptures, much like the Bible. It's the same, but not like this, where there's an actual process of how the world came about and why and what initiated it, so forth. I don't think any spiritually minded person would deny that Meher Baba went further in describing these things than anybody else ever has, as far as we know. So that's the part that I think will become integrated into the great faiths of the world. That people don't need to leave their religion. They don't need to start a cult. If you want, you can go do that. Good luck. I don't want to do that, and I don't want to belong to your cult. Or there's another thing. Baba had a thing called the New Life, and you can read up on that. And anyone's free to go and live this new life, which is very, very much like Jesus or Buddha, relying on God and giving up all desires. So, and that you can do by yourself, or with your spouse, or a small group, however you want to do it. So things are, I think, in the future going to be left up to people in a very much more democratic way, much more analogous to what I described as the multipolar world. So we're coming from the idea of a power dictating to the followers, and this new thing where people go their own way, And I heard that, heard this from a friend. I hope I get this right. I'm not an expert in religion, so I'm doing my best. But I heard that from my friend Al Grasso that just of Tibetan Buddhism, there are 1,000 variants. Okay? Now, I think that's terrific. Why can't there be 1,000 variants? And why not 1,000 variants of how to understand Meher Baba's teaching? And 1,000 variants of how to integrate it with this religion or that there needn't be one. That some will be powerful and raise money and have money and authority, grotesque, whatever. That's what they want to do. A lot of people love that. They want to have some structure, some organization, you climb, become important in it.
My object in coming to the West is not with the intention of establishing new creeds or spiritual societies and organizations.
So, using that analogy of moving from, a Vatican, a new Vatican for the Baba people, which some people literally envision, kind of structuring a new movement based on like the United Nations. I've actually heard this. I don't know anything about it. I don't go to meetings about it or anything. But, by the way, the Circle Center where I talk from is very independent of all that. It's not a religion. It's a community center. And okay, that's my idea. Probably have to rethink this. And after some people have seen it and given me some feedback, maybe they'll say, "Chris, you're out of your mind. That didn't make any sense at all." Well, that's feedback. Well, make comments in this video. Tell me what you think. Because if I could tell this in a speedier way, that's more inspiring, that'd be great. But that's the best I can do for now. Thank you for being here. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Jai Baba. Bye-bye.